In August 2025, the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was doing exactly what the United States Navy had been maintaining for more than 4 decades, keeping the North Atlantic safe and open so that IKEA furniture could peacefully find its way into American living rooms. Everything was normal until a patrol aircraft detected a strange signal, triggering the most intense submarine hunt since the Cold War. The Americans had no idea that the Northern Fleet had just ordered Russian submarines to close in on the strike group and collect every piece of data possible. But Moscow was about to learn why challenging the United States Navy in the Atlantic was as foolish as telling your wife directly that she had gained weight. Inside the Ford's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer monitored the paths of the Russian submarines with the calmness of someone backed by 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each armed well enough to turn any submarine into an artificial coral reef. At the Russians' current speed, they would enter torpedo range in exactly 47 minutes. For the Russians, the math was also very clear. Once launched, their torpedoes needed less than 6 minutes to cross the remaining distance. But Ford's escorts carried the RUM-139VL Azraq, an anti-submarine missile that could reach the Russians in just 90 seconds. At 15 hours and 3 minutes, the admiral wanted to know the possible intentions of the Russian submarines. The answer was completely clear. At their current speed and heading, they would enter intelligence, collection range in 40 more minutes. The recommendation: put the whole battle group on alert. But the admiral's reaction was peak American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves. That assumed they were even skilled enough to approach undetected. Within seconds, Link 16 automatically transmitted the Russian submarine data to all NATO units in the area. What followed looked like watching a SWAT team react to an idiot trying to rob a children's lemonade stand. A British Type 23 frigate conducting exercises 50 miles away immediately turned around, sprinting south at full speed. P-8. A Poseidon aircraft took off from Scotland, Norway, and Iceland, each worth 130 million United States dollars, and so sensitive they could hear a shrimp sneeze at a depth of 500 meters. A United States Virginia-class submarine, which had secretly tailed the Russian group since they left port 3 days earlier, was finally cleared to reveal its presence. By 15 hours and 15 minutes, the situation shifted from interesting to outright comedy. The Russians deployed what they believed was a sophisticated deception tactic. One submarine rose to a depth of 200 meters, intentionally making noise, while the other 2 dove deep to slip quietly into the battle space. A 1943-style Wolfpack, except it was 2025 and NATO's acoustic processors, could distinguish a noisy decoy from 2 quiet submarines as easily as recognizing a broken shopping cart. Wheel. The Russians were not just being aggressive, they were conducting a coordinated intelligence gathering operation that might have been impressive if the year were 1985. They wanted to record the Ford's acoustic signature, map the escort formation, intercept radar emissions, all extremely valuable information if you plan to confront the United States Navy. Their problem was they had no idea what was coming next, as a swarm of NATO ships and aircraft converged on them like a crowd of Karens rushing to yell at a restaurant manager. Only 20 minutes later, the first P-8 was overhead, and the 3 Russian submarines were about to learn what hammering meant by NATO standards. The P-8 Poseidon was a Boeing 737 that had abandoned shuttling tourists to Florida to become the world's most advanced submarine hunting aircraft. Worth 130 million United States dollars, it could hear 2 dolphins arguing with their spouses at 500 meters below. The P-8 began by dropping sonobuoys in a box pattern. These were die-cast buoys, essentially remote-controlled underwater microphones that scream directly at submarines until they reveal themselves. Each buoy cost more than the annual income of most Russians, and NATO dropped them like handing out free candy. Each buoy emitted active sonar at 140 decibels, louder than gunfire reverberating through a steel hull. Imagine being locked in a container while someone beat the outside with a sledgehammer. Inside the Kazan submarine, the first ping made the entire vessel feel like a giant bell struck by the rock wielding a warhammer. sonar operators tore off their headsets so fast they were probably going to need orthopedic care. The myth of absolute stealth evaporated instantly. They were now the loudest things in the ocean, like a Harley Davidson at a silent meditation retreat. Every 30 seconds, ping, no escape, no pause, just ping. While the Russians panicked, the P-8 crew enjoyed the most entertaining shift of their careers. Crews rotated every 4 hours. Their food was real food, not something squeezed through a tube. The bathroom did not share space with nuclear missiles. They were working in the aviation version of a WeWork office, while the Russians were trapped in the underwater equivalent of a middle seat on Spirit Airlines. And the United States Navy was only getting started. It was time for the Arleigh destroyers to shine. They activated their bow sonar's spherical arrays, containing hundreds of acoustic transducers, acting like underwater radar, by listening for reflections from submarine hulls and joined the acoustic assault. These systems could pump out so much acoustic energy that nearby fish might be stunned. The Russians were not just being tracked. They were experiencing what happens when the United States decides to use the entire ocean as a giant concert speaker. Then came the simulated attacks. P-8, a Poseidons dove from 25,000 feet, charging at the sea surface as if preparing to release weapons. The exhausted Russian sailors had to assume any dive might be real. Emergency order. Dive deep. Blow ballast. Hard rudder turn. Like being subjected to 50 fake slaps, you know it is a prank, but you still flinch every time. The Kazan submarine attempted the underwater equivalent of flooring the gas pedal to escape the police, a dash at 30 knots. Its OK650V reactor pumped out 43,000 horsepower, impressive until you realize it created noise comparable to tossing a washing machine full of hammers down an elevator shaft. But why were the Russians enduring all this? Look at the radars on the Ford's mast. Each radar has a fingerprint, frequency, pulse shape, power levels. Capture this, and you can design specialized jammers. The Russians were recording the full electromagnetic spectrum, gathering every signal the strike group emitted. The carrier launched aircraft every 90 seconds. That rhythm revealed crew rotations, maintenance cycles, and vulnerability windows. They also noted which escort used which data link channel, and the communication formation, essentially building a digital blueprint of how a United States carrier strike group operates. This kind of information helps develop weapons and tactics to threaten carrier groups, but NATO had no intention of letting them finish their homework. All 3 Russian submarines deployed acoustic decoys devices mimicking submarine noise to confuse tracking. NATO responded like a masterpiece. Computers analyzed each decoy in about 1/3 of a second and essentially said, "Cute," before resuming perfect track on the real submarines. It was like someone throwing a mannequin out of a moving car hoping to fool police, except the police had helicopters, satellites, and your license plate number. And things only got worse for the Russians. By hour 24, NATO had turned submarine hunting into performance art. A British ship entered with a Type 2087 towed sonar array, stretching 2,000 meters behind. MH-60 Romeo helicopters rotated on station, hovering 50 feet above the water and dipping sonar into the depths. The Russians tried hiding in thermocline's underwater temperature layers that distort sound. Unfortunately for them, dipping sonar cut through thermoclines like they were not even there, like trying to hide from your wife behind a glass door. But despite how easy it looked, it required extreme coordination. A single air control mistake could cause aircraft collisions. NATO divided the airspace into layers. P-8. As from 20,000 to 25,000 feet, helicopters below 500 feet, each aircraft maintaining 5,000 feet of lateral separation. Each nation used its own radio bands. The United States used UHF, the United Kingdom used VHF, Norway used both because they had to translate everything. Every aircraft had fixed patrol zones like parking spaces in the sky, and leaving a zone required permission from the air controller. The Data Fusion Center in Northwood integrated all sensor inputs in real time, forming a three-dimensional battlespace map that looked like the world's most expensive video game. But this was real, and NATO crews were thoroughly enjoying bullying the Russians. Helicopters hovered directly above submarines, dipped sonar, and began pinging. The Russian sailors likely felt the vibration in their teeth. Arleigh Burke destroyers used not only their bow sonar, but also the AN divided by SQR-19 towed array, dragging a long line of hydrophones behind them to capture every Russian noise. Rumors said one Russian sailor asked his captain whether they could surface and apologize because the pings were giving him stomach pain. The Russians were not just hunted. They were experiencing the United States turning the entire ocean into a giant audio system. The submarine screens were filled with more sonar returns than a Kardashian Instagram account has notifications. P-8s above, helicopters mid-layer, surface ships all around. This was no longer anti-submarine warfare. It was a complete rout. NATO turned the Norwegian Sea into a 48-hour EDM festival, where the Russians could not find the exit and the music never stopped. But here came the best part. Remember the United States Virginia-class submarine? For the entire 48 hours, it maintained a perfect trailing position using its TB-34 towed array, operating so quietly it was like a ghost carrying torpedoes. The American crew watched everything like a Netflix documentary titled How to Be a Submariner and Why Russians Cannot. They recorded every sound, every evasive maneuver, every desperate attempt to break contact. The Russians tried everything. Hiding in underwater canyons, NATO helicopters hovered above and dipped sonar like fishing in a barrel. Sudden depth changes? Destroyer sonars tracked them from surface to seabed. Sprint and drift tactics? The American submarine matched every motion like a dance partner who knew the choreography better than you did. At one point, the United States captain sent a message, a single active sonar ping from their BQQ-10 array. Not enough to reveal exact position, but enough to tell the Russians they had been followed from the very beginning. Imagine John Cena tailing you for 2 days. You never see him, but he is there, occasionally whispering, "You cannot see me," just to break your spirit. By day 2, P-8 crews developed their own game, timing sonar pings specifically to interrupt the Russian crew's REM sleep cycles. Every time they began to drift off ping, like living with someone who sets an alarm every 5 minutes but never gets out of bed. After 48 hours of this, the Russian sailors were probably seeing colors that did not exist and having conversations with imaginary people, and it still was not over. Desperation set in. After the 48-hour ordeal, the 3 Russian submarines attempted a frantic escape. They used every trick in the Soviet handbook, which would have been effective if this were 1982, and NATO had not rewritten the handbook decades ago. Using seabed terrain, P-8s switched immediately to magnetic anomaly detection. Extreme depth changes, destroyers tracked them seamlessly. Firing every remaining decoy, NATO systems classified them like collecting Pokemon cards. Gotta catch them all, but all useless at least most of the time. After several more hours, the Russians realized escaping NATO in the Norwegian Sea was like trying to evade the tax office during tax season. They knew where you were going, and even how much you owed. The Russians finally had to abort the intelligence mission, which in military language meant fleeing while pretending it was part of the plan. They retreated north, still submerged, probably drafting a report about a successful reconnaissance mission that definitely did not involve 48 hours of acoustic torture. NATO maintained contact as they withdrew, like security escorting someone kicked out of a nightclub. P-8s followed them for a while to ensure they had left the area and to tease them one last time. Everyone knew what had happened, but everyone kept a straight face. In those 48 hours, NATO collected enough acoustic data to identify those submarines from space. Every pump, every valve, even the way their toilet flushed was now in NATO's database. Russian media declared this a successful reconnaissance mission. Well, That is like saying the Titanic performed an excellent iceberg detection test. They learned the Norwegian Sea was not a contested waterway. It was NATO's private swimming pool. The overall lesson was simple yet profound. You can build the most advanced submarines in the world, but if you cannot survive 2 days of democracy remix, blasted through active sonar, then next time you should probably stay out of deep water. Goodbye. See you next time.